Imagine a workplace where people feel seen, valued, and motivated to give their best. Janice Brathwaite has a 5-step method that we're going to break down to help leaders create exactly that.
Building psychological safety and allowing people to express themselves and bring ideas forth really helps an organization to start to eliminate some of that toxicity. Because when you give people that ability to make decisions, they become empowered. You're not going to have the best of the best if you keep going in the direction you go in.
Today's guest is Janice Brathwaite, founder of Workplace Transformation, where she helps companies identify and repair damage caused by toxic culture. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So let's just dive right in. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Can we start with a baseline for the listeners and viewers about what is organizational culture?
That's a big question. A lot of people, it's such a big topic that a lot of people kind of get like, they're not quite sure, or they think they know, but they don't really know. So this is what I do. I try to make it as easy as possible for people to visualize, because there are foundations that are built, the buildings are built on top of. And in those foundations, there are bricks. And sometimes those bricks start to crack. And that changes the stability of the building. So I look at culture as those cracks in those bricks. Not everything is damaged, but some of those bricks are not quite right.
So when you look at organizational culture, your philosophy says you honor the past, but look into the future. How do you bring that into your work with companies?
Well, that starts right at the very beginning. I realized that a lot of times, again, when people hear the word organizational culture change, what they really hear, especially leadership, what they really hear is everything I've done up to this point has been wrong.
Mm.
So in order to kind of make it even, what I do is I start out by asking an organization, what are some of the great things about your organization? What are some of the things that you think are working really, really well? So they, can start to identify those. It's a more positive way to get into the conversation. And then once we've got that list together, I say, well, those are things we probably don't have to deal with. Now let's talk about the things we may have to deal with. Some of the things that keep you awake at night and make you think, how can we fix this? So we move into that, in talking about the changes that need to be made.
If you're a leader, you've built a great, let's call it a building. It's a great building, this company. There are just a few cracks. You don't have to knock the whole thing down. Let's figure out
Exactly.
what's cracking. Cool. How did you know you wanted to get into this line of work?
Well, I kind of fell into it. I was in healthcare, and I had opportunity to present my idea around organizational culture to the Health Research Service Administration. It's a federal agency that funds community health centers. And I thought, as I was presenting it, I thought, oh, they're not going to be interested in this at all. And to my surprise, I presented one day, and then they asked me to come back the next day and talk about it some more. So I was like, okay, so they are interested. So at that point, I didn't know what was going to happen after that. And they made it a promising practice, which is in government terms, stuff that can be spread across the country into different organizations, healthcare organizations specifically. So what happened was they ended up putting that as a thing that we had to do in our federal grant, the company's federal grant.
Wow.
So that's really how I started digging and working with community health centers, was based on that first interaction that I had with, we call it HRSA.
And did you notice cracks in your own organization where you were working, and that's what made you want to kind of address it and figure out how to fix it?
Yeah, every organization has them, it's just identifying them and fixing them. I think what I found was I use this in a newsletter. I have a newsletter called The Cultural Catalyst on LinkedIn. And I was talking about how I used to make a joke when I would walk out of a conference room and say, hey, did you see that big lump under the rug? Look at me like, what? What are you talking about? The big hump. I said, well, those are the things we've swept under the rug all these years. But some point in time, you have to address them. And if you don't, then your organization is not going to be as successful as it could be. And I think that's what really made me start thinking. You see this a lot in conference rooms where there's somebody presenting and it's a leader in the organization and somebody in the in the organization, working in the organization, knows that there's something wrong with that, but they're not going to say anything
Hmm.
because of their fear of retribution. So building psychological safety and allowing people to express themselves and bring ideas forth and not, say, well, no, that's not going to work. It's not going to work. It really helps an organization to start to eliminate some of that toxicity.
Yes. The fear based leadership is one kind of toxic culture I've been a part of. I know a lot of us probably
Mhm.
have faced. What are some other toxic culture attributes that you've seen inside a business? What does it actually look like?
Well, I think it varies, but one of the big ones is communication. That that are working in organizations don't feel like they're getting clear communication from the people that are running the organization. Usually that comes out at one of the top two things that are
Mm,
concerns for people in the organization. And you do that via an assessment. And the other one is recognition. People don't feel like they're recognized for the work that they do. And that's not necessarily just money, because a lot of people say, well, we recognize when we give them a raise. Well, that's to me a short term satisfier. That's not going to make everything okay. You know yourself, after you get a raise, a couple of months later, it's just part of your lifestyle.
mm.
So it doesn't really matter anymore. So it's not that, it's something else that they're looking for. And I always say to leaders, it's not that you have to go out and make a big deal about this, but once you see somebody doing something good or well or interacting with a client or a patient, you just go up to them and say, you did a really good job with that. It's as quick as that.
Mhm.
Doesn't have to be, a big, like I say, a big to do. A lot of people don't like a big thing to happen and be recognized. So, just figuring out which ones you can do that with and which ones you can't. But everybody that you see, no matter what, everybody likes that little tap on the shoulder when they hear, you did that really, really well. Keep up the good work.
Yes. For communication, I've worked with some leaders who want to hoard what's going on or kind of hide because either they don't trust their team to be able to handle the news of the business, or for some reason they're not clearly stating what the goals are or what's going well or what's not going well.
Mhm.
How can a leader identify, oops, I'm hoarding or I'm not being a clear communicator?
I think some of them actually have to have coaching to understand it,
Mhm.
how to do this and what it do I there's a saying, and I can't remember exactly who said it, was management by walking around. What we have now in the workplace is an us and them. And when you have that kind of dynamic, you're not going to be successful because you're fighting against each other. A lot of times leaders get so busy and they get so stuck in their offices and they taking phone calls and they just can't get up off that chair and go out and walk around and interact with the staff. I did this. I used to be in banking and I worked in a really highly secure area of a bank. And it was tough because people were they weren't locked in there, but there's a big metal door. You couldn't come in. And I said to myself, these people have ideas and things that might want to do or might see something that they could make better. So I started doing that. I started managing by walking around. And the other thing I did was I created self-directed teams within this department where people were setting up their day. Like this was kind of like almost like a manufacturing, but it was money. I
Mhm.
know we weren't manufacturing money, but there was money there.
Uh-huh.
Set up their day and how they're going to do and who's the best at doing certain types of deposits. And when I first presented it, I'll always laugh. I always laugh about this. First time I presented it, I looked around the room and everybody was looking at me like, what's she talking? And then somebody actually said, well, you're the manager. You're supposed to tell us what to do. I said, yes, that's true to some extent, but you know more about this work than I do. You do it every day. So you know the best way to do it. And it just changed the whole dynamic of the place. It was amazing. One day my boss called me in because she said that there was a backlog in cash and you could only keep so much cash on hand. And maybe we should stop those meetings. And I pushed back and I said, well, they're only, 5 or 10 minutes. Doesn't take very long. Well, I know, but and so eventually the boss is the boss.
Mhm.
So I'm sitting in my office. I had a big glass in office. I was sitting in my office, and all of a sudden, I noticed there was nobody on the floor. There were where did everybody go? I got up from my, I got up from my desk. I walked out, And there they are, all down the end of the hall meeting. Because when you give people that ability to make decisions, they become empowered.
Hmm.
And they were like, this is working. I don't know why we're not doing it any. Because I had to tell them, we're in a little bit of a bind. And so they said, they put their heads together and said, this is what we think is the best way to get this backlog down.
It's amazing. So you trusted them and you empowered them.
Exactly. Because they know better than I.
And that in itself is a little bit of recognition. The trusting of your team is just as good as a pat on the shoulder a lot of times.
Exactly. Yeah. That you do know what you're doing.
Hmm.
And my boss actually hired me because she wanted someone to come in and be more humanistic about how the people were managed. And I thought, well, this fits right into that. So let's give it a try. Let's see what happens. And it worked really, really well. I don't know why that's stopped. Did people stop doing that? Because it's a good process, a good way to get things done and get people recognized, like you say.
Hmm. Is there a way for a company to be financially successful? Like, look at them, they're growing, but still have a toxic culture?
Oh, of course. They can, monetarily, they can be very, very successful without having a positive culture, organizational culture. And they do that with heavy handed. Some of the stuff I see on Instagram makes me laugh. People do these little skits about, and there's one guy who's talking about, we're going to be more like Japan. We're going to do instead of 6, whatever the number was, we're going to do 7, this was 7 hours, 7 days a week. And I was like, okay, you're going to probably get more productivity, but at what cost? It doesn't even make sense. So yeah, I think that can be, and we've seen it. I've seen it. I'm sure you've seen it as well. That you say to yourself, I don't know how they get away with that. That doesn't seem right. That heavy-handed approach, and not listening to the staff, and But eventually, I think it catches up with you
Hmm.
because people talk. And one of the things they oftentimes talk about is where they work. And if somebody's thinking about possibly going to work in that organization and you're talking about it and you're saying, we can't do this and we have to do that. And a person listening to that is going to say, maybe I don't want to be there. And they could be a very talented person that could add a lot of value to your organization, but they just don't want to work there. Word of mouth is powerful. Word of mouth is very powerful.
A few years ago, when I was applying for I was looking for a new full time role. I asked somebody who had been in the C suite at this company, they had left. I said, tell me about it. I see this role, it's a perfect fit for my skill set and what I'm interested in. It's like, I don't think you're going to like it there. I said,
Yeah, that look.
he left and I trusted and liked this guy. So there's something there he's not saying. And then also, this is just saying, I don't think this is the culture for you. I was like, okay, I didn't even apply. I was like, I don't even want to.
Right.
No,
Why
no
waste your
need.
time? Yeah,
Yeah.
why be miserable? Yeah, I think that does happen, and people start wondering, well, why can't we attract good people? What's going on? This is particularly true in healthcare, that they have treated their employees poorly,
Uh-huh.
really poorly in many, many cases. And then they wonder why they have so much turnover and they can't get people to come to work for them. And and that's why I started working with these organizations, the healthcare organizations, to try to get them to see that there's a better way to do this. You're not going to have the best of the best if you keep going in the direction you're going in.
That's a great segue for the next question. What are some of the impacts that a broken culture can have, either on retention, growth, brand recognition?
Retention is definitely one of them, and turnover is huge. And I think today, when I hear people say, a bunch of people left that organization, and I say to myself, well, do they all have jobs? When you walk out of a place and you don't have a job, it's pretty bad. You just can't take it anymore.
Hmm.
And so some of the signs are this, like I say, this us and them mentality that's existing that I see in organizations. And also the not really doing an assessment. Like I do a deep assessment, and I really encourage all of the organizations to do this type of assessment where it covers a whole myriad of territory. So you can see very clearly by the results what's working well and what is really not working. And what I do with that information is I crunch all the numbers and everything. And then I give them, we'll call it a playbook with suggestions, but also with the idea that, some of these things are going to take some time to implement, and if you need my assistance in implementing them, that's why I'm here. One of
Mm.
the things I said to myself as a consultant, I'm not going to be that consultant that comes in, does a project, gets it done, comes in the office and throws something on a desk and said, here, go forth and multiply, and just leave you hanging. Because again, if people really knew how to do this, they would do it. I would hope.
Yes. I interview a lot of founders, business leaders, and also folks who are coaches and consultants that come in, fractional workers. And I'm really leaning towards if you have a problem, have somebody from outside come in, even if it's for a week, and just say, do an audit. Help me see what I can't see as a starting point. It can't hurt.
No, because sometimes you're so close to it, you just don't see everything around you. You're so close to it and you're so focused on that. I know myself sometimes when I'm stuck at with something, if I get up and move away and come back, then I can, yeah, now that's how it goes. That's how it can be fixed. So, I think that they have to really think about doing deep assessments. And again, I have a five-pronged approach to this. And one of them is to have a leadership lab, and then that leadership lab it's really about having leaders come in and learn how to communicate, go through a process of training people how to communicate better. And it's a coaching kind of a thing, but I think it really does help address how the messages are going to be given to people. One of the situations I had, I was working for a company and they said they were remodeling the office. And they came out and they said, you know, we really want your input to help us do this. And so everybody was like, well, that sounds good. The only thing we had input on was the color of the rug and the paint on the wall. Everything else we had no input on. So I was talking to a leader from that organization, and they said, well, look at the great work we did, renovating this place and, look and making it look better. And I said, and everybody complained. That's how you know.
Mm.
Because they're like, they're not just, their backs are up, they're like, I could have helped them with that, but they didn't want it. So, you know what? That looks really awful. Even, and he said, and they were just complaining all the time. And I said, well, the reason why they were complaining was because they were told that they would have input. And when that didn't happen, it becomes like, like a sore on your arm. It's
Mhm.
just it's there, it's there. And and you keep rubbing it because you're like, those people didn't know what they were doing. Why did they make that space like that? Well, that's not going to suffice. That's the kind of thing that can happen, if people don't communicate effectively. And there's lots of people out there that really struggle with that. How do you give bad news? How do you say I made a mistake? If more more leaders would say I made a mistake and humanize themselves a little bit, that might go toward really impacting any negativity or toxicity that's been attributed to them. At least it's a beginning, but
It's something.
usually it's not me, it's you guys, you did it, so that could definitely help.
So you have experience as an executive coach, a life coach. You're a certified International Coaching Federation.
Yes.
My coach had a whole episode about how to find a legit coach. Go to ICF. Someone
Yeah.
who's been trained and won't give you wacky advice. How does your coaching start with leaders and then trickle throughout the organization?
It started with when I worked with a leader of an organization. I always say that you cannot make change from the bottom up, successful change from the bottom up. It has to come top down. So the first thing I have to do is get the leader to understand why this is important, how this whole process works, what might be some of the outcomes, so that they're clear about how the process is going to work. And, I found that that's worked very well because then if they're really into it, and you can tell if they're really into it or not, they're gonna push to get this done and encourage their people to take an assessment or whatever that needs to get done. So going to the top, stop there because you know yourself, if they don't buy in, you're just wasting your time and they're wasting their money. So, you need to get that person to really start thinking about the importance of doing this.
If you're in an organization that has a toxic culture, maybe you're a middle manager
Mhm.
and you have some access to the C-suite. How can you go about, say, bringing up, "Hey, this is something that we should consider looking into, or we need to fix this?
Well, you have to have sort of have a champion to help you do that, but you have to do it. Well, this is what I said to a leader that I always said when talked about organizational culture, people was kind of like would frown. And and I said to them, I couldn't figure out it. So I asked a CEO that I had worked with, and I said, I think I know why. Because you're still hearing everything I've done is wrong up to this point. That's not what this is about. So getting voices heard, it really is a tough thing. And you have to be somewhat brave to step out there and do it. And, really kind of figure out, what's the best way to interact with this particular leader? You know, do they like it, come at you straight? Do they like it go around, a little bit around the bush? How do you like this? And eventually, if the leader is smart, they'll start to listen because the people that are doing the work have the knowledge to make it better. That's what I don't understand. It's really just ridiculous because they're the ones doing the work. And if something's going wrong, they're the first ones to know. So why wouldn't you want to listen?
Is there a way to spot, maybe it's an us versus them as a leader? Oof, maybe I'm stuck in this us versus them and I need to do something about it.
Yeah, I think that, you have to have self-reflection, and that's where a coach comes in because it makes you, when I was going through training, they told me that, you're not there to solve the problem. You're there to help the person solve the problem. Because once they have committed, then they're more than likely to continue with that. But they're not going to take it if you tell them what to do. They're going to
Mhm.
be like, okay, and just keep moving. So I think you have to approach it that way, really think about how this is impacting them and also getting them to think what they can do to fix it. I do value driven hiring too, which is a big part of this whole process that I do. And one of the things I've realized over time is that a lot of time turnover is caused by a mismatch between the employee and the company. So how do you find people that believe what you believe, that believe in the mission that you have? And there's a way to do that. And I really found out about this because I had an AmeriCorps program that I used to run from one of the organizations that I was with. And I realized that I had to hire people every year, 20 people more, 20 people at least, and to come in and do a year of service. And first year I did it, I was like, I just didn't feel like I hit the mark with the right people.
Mhm.
You know, they were okay, but I had concerns about they were going to be placed away from me in various sites about how they would react or interact or behave, if you want to use that word, when they got there. So I said, there's a better way to do this. There's a better way to do this. So then I started doing some research and I eventually came up when I started to, this is how value came into it. I would ask people when I was training, I used to do patient experience training and I would ask them, so what are the values of this organization? And everybody looked at me like a deer in the headlights. They had no idea. And then they say like, well, we serve everyone no matter ability to pay. Yeah, that's what you do.
Uh-huh.
But what's the value behind it? The other thing is if you're a leader and you're a manager and you're hiring somebody who doesn't have some of the essential values and you say, oh, well, that'll be fine. I can teach them. You cannot teach people a value. I've come to the conclusion that's not possible. People either decide to have a value or they don't. And you can talk to them forever about it. And if they don't want to do it, they're not going to do it. So don't think, you can train someone in a skill, but you cannot train them in a value. So why waste your time?
Yeah. Don't try to force it.
Mhm.
It's not going to work. How does your work impact some of the companies that you've been a part of, your clients?
I think for some of them, it was just an aha moment, when they were like, yeah, there is really something here, something that we've not heard before. And I think it's awareness, raising awareness about organizational culture, what it is, what it isn't, giving people that roadmap to change, to any changes that they want to do, showing them how to, maybe talk to the staff about this particular thing. So it covers a lot of territory, and it really depends on the organization. Some you go into, and I know I went to one that was on Cape Cod, and I didn't know why they had me in because they were doing pretty well. I mean, they may have had a few things that they needed to fix, but overall they were pretty strong. But the leader realized, well, I need to know everything. I know this is okay, but what else is there that I might not be seeing? And I had to give her credit because a lot of people wouldn't have done that. They would have said, "We're fine. We're just fine. Doing our jobs great. Everything is going on." And in this one, it was something came up because there were so on the bottom floor there were the people that interact with the patients. On the top floor was all the leadership, and they when I was so what I do is I talk to the leader first, then I go to the senior leadership team, then I go to the managers and supervisors, and then frontline staff. And between the leader and the frontline staff, it's a whole different story, you know? So you may hear, "Oh, yeah, 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 we do. Oh, we're great at that." But when you start going down, within the organization, you find that that's not true. So it's very important to speak to as many people as you can doing this work. I think if you want a broad overview of what that organization is.
For sure. You've mentioned you have 5 points assessments and then you talked
Yeah.
about coaching folks. What is the process like when you step into a new company?
Well, the first thing is like I say, I sit down with the leader, the CEO or executive director, whoever's in charge, and really talk to them about, you know, the good things about the organization, like I said at the beginning. And then we start talking about the pain points, things that are really keeping that person awake at night, to get an idea. And some of the things that leaders will say are really working well. As you make your way down the organization, you find they're not working well. You don't see the whole, evidently have not seen the whole broad spectrum of why this is not working. So trying to get people to, so I think the process I use, I really like this process. That's because it's mine. I like, but going through the entire levels of all the organization, because you're going to get different ideas, thoughts, problems, things that they think are great, and then you're going to be able to have a fuller picture, not just the CEO and the senior leadership team saying everything is great, but you're going to see, the whole organization, warts and all.
After you've made your assessments, talked to leadership and said, "Hey, this is what we found." And they say, "Yep, let's work to make those changes, shore up those cracks." How long does it typically take to see a real shift in an organization?
I would say, depending on what they're changing, because some things, of course, will take longer than others. I would say, and I have a survey that I do at 6 months to see where they are in the work that they're doing, just to kind of see where they might be stumbling a little bit, and I can go back to them and say, I noticed in the survey that you were having a little bit of trouble with this. Within 6 months, I mean, like I did lean training and trying to implement a change, it's not difficult to implement it. It's not the implementation, it's the sustainability. How long are they going to keep doing this? And a lot of times with lean projects, you get a great result. But when it's, going throughout, within the organization, it just kind of just peters out, like it goes away. So I think that, the lean concepts are great. I would probably use some of them in my work, but I don't think that that's the be all and end all for change within an organization.
Do leaders usually come to you when there's a huge blow up, or do they have little red flags they could spot earlier to say, "I think we should bring in some help"?
I think it's more around they surmise something or they can't figure out why a particular thing isn't working as well. And they see departments with lot of turnover and they're trying to figure out, well, why is that department have so much turnover? Is it the manager? Is it and middle managers, God bless them, because they take the brunt of this. And I know today they're trying to get rid of that level, which I don't think is the greatest idea. Yeah, so they know what's going on, and they're either afraid to talk to the leader about it or their manager about it because they don't want to come off as being a naysayer or whatever. So they just kind of, hopefully, we can get through this kind of thing. We can
Mhm.
get through this. We'll be much better off. No, no, no.
That's the lump under the rug.
Right, exactly. There you go. I call that culture debt. That's all the stuff that can impact your culture, and it's all debt you gotta pay back. You're gonna pay one way or the other.
What's one question that most founders can ask their team to even get a pulse on, is there a healthy culture here?
It's hard to say one question. I have a thing that I do, a culture clarity snapshot, which really highlights 5 questions, that's all it is. And that can give a leader an idea of where some of the issues might be. Because if you ask people, they're going to say, not maybe nothing,
Hmm.
maybe nothing. Heard a funny story the day about a CEO who was online. He was online. He was recording and had his people out there. And for some reason, he asked, very kindly, does anybody have any questions? And silence. There were 1,100 people on that call. Silence. And he was like, so then he would say again, well, this is a great opportunity, to bring up, to concerns about maybe what just said. Nothing. So he was a really angry CEO when he got off that call. He's like, I'm giving people an opportunity, but the culture of that organization has probably been very stifled. And this leader I admire because I believe that this person has the skills that will make this organization even better than it is. So he realized that there were problems. So he brought in a group of people. My son works there, so I can't do this. But to look at the transformation, to transform the culture of the organization. He realized that. So I tip my hat. Nobody had to come and tell you. You figured it out and you
Hmm.
said, we're going to do something about it. And I say, that's great.
Doesn't always work that way. If somebody's not saying anything on the call, I think that's a little flag that a leader should listen to. Either they're scared of you or they're checked out or something's going on. So,
In the past, the previous CEO may have been heavy handed
mhm.
and they're like, we can't trust this person. And so this person is now, the new CEO has got to overcome all of that baggage that the other CEO left behind and has realized that. And like I say, some don't realize it. They just keep going. But this person realized it and said, we're gonna make some changes.
That's inherited culture debt. It's inheriting the predecessor's reaction. Wow.
Yeah. I mean,
Hey.
when I was telling you about that place where I did self-directed teams, the previous person that had worked there, he was heavy-handed, very
Mm.
heavy-handed. So when I came in, they were like little cowering people, like they didn't know what to do. And I was like, oh no, this isn't going to work. This is not going to work. I'm not that person. So but that's what can happen. You have like PTSD. I do
Mhm.
believe people get PTSD from jobs and it sticks with them. So it takes a long time to build that trust, that leader to build that trust to get people to open up. You know, he's saying, if I'm asking you, I want to know. I wouldn't ask you if I didn't want to. But they're still kind of stuck maybe in the previous regime, so to speak.
And leaders might inherit it. I've inherited a few sales teams, but you might inherit somebody who's had a leader like that before, and it's like, why won't they just talk to me? Why are they being
Yes.
so closed? They've got the PTSD.
Yep.
Maybe as a leader, you need to get coaching on how do I help this person open up or get them coaching. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah. It's difficult, and that's why you have to learn how to communicate better. Communication is the biggest thing, I think, in any organization. I had a client that called me in because they were having difficulty with one floor of this organization, which I found very funny because it's not just one floor. It's one floor, it's all the floors. They wanted me to come in and talk to the nurses, the doctors, and the frontline staff. The first day I talked to the nurses, I don't know if you have any nurses in your family, but they tell you the truth. They don't mess around. They told me a scenario about how they had not been asked about a process that was going to be outsourced and how to do that, how to train those people how to do it so that they did it and understood the patients that were their patients. They said, we found out on a Friday they were outsourcing it on Monday. So no matter how good this process is, they're not going to be buying into it.
Yeah.
And even physicians, working with physicians and meeting with them in the same organization. One thing they said, and it was really kind of sad, very sad. They said, we're working as hard as we can and nobody cares. And then one of them started crying. Never seen a doctor cry. And, they're so frustrated because they're not getting recognized, even recognizing the kind of environment you have to work under. It's hard. It's hard. Anybody says healthcare is easy. No, it's not. The way I believe, it's difficult. And so, they're working under difficult circumstances, but they're not hearing, oh, that patient. Oh, how did you work? How did that work out with everything? Something. Talk to them. Don't just say all those people on that floor are bad people and they're causing trouble. So again, that's why I keep going back to is communication is the key.
Yep, the 2 points you said, communication and recognition,
Yep.
both in that same story.
Yep.
That's great.
Exactly.
We're gonna link to your newsletter and workplace transformation. If there's a leader or someone in a leadership team who thinks, "Hey, we should at least learn more about this," how can they reach out to you and get started?
They can send me an email at janice@uptransformation.com. And that's my direct email, my business email. And I would love to talk to them, and maybe give them an opportunity to do this culture clarity snapshot so they can get an idea of, what kind of problems might be out there. Like I say, it's only 5 questions. It's free. I
Yeah.
give it away. So if anybody wants it or wants more information about it, I'd love to have them reach out to me.
At the very least, they can start seeing there is something underneath the rug.
Exactly.
And then they can decide if they wanna look and do something about it or just let it pile up.
Exactly. Just leave it there,
Leave it
but it's gonna hurt you eventually, so you're gonna
Someone's
pay
gonna
for it
trip.
anyhow.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate you coming on. This is a sensitive subject for leaders and the team, but very important for growth and happiness at work.
Absolutely. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Talk to you soon.
All right, take care.